In the western Virginia mountains, where century-old pines dance with fog and time appears frozen in the 1920s, there exists a place America chose to forget. Odd, a tiny Appalachian community, has become synonymous with what modern society views as absolute taboo. Generations of marriage between direct relatives. The Whittaker family property is reached by a narrow, irregular dirt road, flanked by wooden houses and rusty trailers that defy gravity. Kilometers before arrival, GPS ceases to function, as if technology itself refuses to acknowledge this place. In 2020, photographer and documentary maker Mark Leiter ventured into these mountains with a camera and a haunting question. How does an entire family survive decades of consanguineous marriage? He discovered a reality that challenges all fiction. The Whittakers are not merely an isolated case. They represent the extreme result of generations of geographical isolation, absolute poverty, and traditions perpetuated for over a century. Ray, Lorraine, Timmy, and Freddie Whittaker are siblings who carry in their bodies and minds the physical and mental marks of a genetic lineage turned inward upon itself. Ray, the eldest, suffers severe physical malformations. His head is disproportionately small, a condition known as microcephaly. He communicates only through grunts. His intellectual capacity severely compromised. Lorraine, the sole sister, has obvious facial deformities and motor difficulties that prevent normal walking. Timmy, though capable of some speech, has a severe intellectual disability. His face bears the unmistakable marks of consanguinity. Facial asymmetry, serious dental issues, and an empty gaze revealing decades of social isolation. Freddie, the youngest, is the only one who can hold basic conversations. Yet even he shows clear cognitive impairment. What shocks most is not merely the visible deformities, but the naturalness with which this family accepts their condition. This is the only reality they know. No mirrors hang in their house. No television shows other families. No reference from the outside world exists to show them how profoundly different they are. Their home is a collection of rooms without electric light, running water, or modern comfort. The smell of mold and abandonment fills every corner. In the backyard, piles of accumulated trash form mountains of debris, blurring the line between garbage and what they consider personal belongings. To understand how the Whittakers reached this point, one must return to the 19th century, when the first settlers arrived in the isolated western Virginia mountains. The Appalachians have always been marked by extreme geographical isolation. Communities formed in deep valleys, separated by insurmountable mountains and kilometers of dense forest. The region's geography is brutal and merciless. Mountains rising abruptly over funds 200 meters create narrow, isolated valleys where small communities developed their own culture, language, and traditions across generations. Winter snows could isolate these communities for months, forcing families to depend entirely on themselves. Geneticist Dr. Spencer Wells explains that when small groups remain geographically isolated for generations, the genetic pool becomes progressively limited. What happened in the Appalachians is a classic example of genetic drift in small founding populations. He states, this leads to a population bottleneck, where a diminished, isolated population loses genetic diversity, creating a vicious cycle that ends in mandatory consanguinity. The Whittaker roots in the region are documented since 1887. Census records show marriages between first-degree cousins by the second generation. By the third, unions between siblings and half-siblings became common practice, not by choice, but from an absolute lack of options. Diaries from Reverend Samuel Morrison, who served from 1920 to 1945, record his growing anguish as he performed such weddings, documenting at least a dozen unions between close Whittaker relatives in a single decade. The isolation was not only geographical, but cultural, religious, and economic. The Whittakers belonged to a fundamentalist sect that saw the outside world as corrupt. Marrying outside the family was geographically impractical and considered a betrayal. This sect developed a theology that encouraged consanguineous marriages to maintain purity. The genetic consequences manifested starkly by the fourth generation. Medical records show that between 1920 and 1950, at least 15 Whittaker children were born with severe disabilities. 8 died before age 5. Prolonged consanguinity results in inbreeding depression, where deleterious recessive genes become dominant. Genetic analysis revealed the current siblings have an extraordinarily high coefficient of inbreeding, 0.355, indicating at least 3 consecutive generations of very close intermarriage. Dr. Sarah Martinez describes them as the human equivalent of a highly inbred laboratory lineage. They carry at least 23 different, expressed recessive mutations simultaneously, a statistically impossible convergence in a normal population. Beyond malformations, they suffer congenital heart problems, partial deafness, kidney issues, and a compromised immune system. They are, paradoxically, the survivors. Church documents indicate at least 7 other siblings were stillborn or died in childhood. Betty Whittaker, a distant cousin who escaped in the 1970s, describes an environment where incest was institutionalized. Girls were assigned a guardian from the family at 14, with no say in the matter. Resistance was met with severe punishment. She recalls her sister Rebecca, who had her legs broken after escape attempts and later died in childbirth. The brothers never attended school. They cannot read, write, or perform basic math. Their world is defined by the isolated property and equally isolated relatives. Tragically, the cycle continues. Freddie has had relationships with first-degree cousins, resulting in 1 child who died in infancy and a second miscarriage. They live on approximately $800 monthly in disability benefits, dependent on church charity for food. The nearest clinic is 45 kilometers away, and they have no transportation. Their existence is silent and without perspective. Social services in Raleigh County were aware of the family's conditions for decades, but consciously chose not to intervene, filing away multiple reports describing subhuman conditions. The system, overwhelmed and under-resourced, treated them as an intractable problem. The Whittaker story transcends sensationalism. It is a profound lesson in American rural poverty, institutional negligence, and the systematic abandonment of marginalized populations. They are not a singular anomaly, but the most extreme point on a spectrum of neglect affecting isolated Appalachian communities. Research indicates inbreeding rates in some mountain communities are 15-20 times the national average. As Dr. Bennett notes, from a scientific viewpoint, the Whittakers show what happens when natural selection is artificially suspended by societal support. Their persistence comes at an immeasurable human cost. Their daily life is a struggle against limitations no person should face. They remain today in their home, without electricity, without hope, and without a future. They are ghosts of an America we prefer to pretend does not exist, hidden in the forgotten folds of a nation proud of its opportunity. The Whittaker family will die in silence as they lived, but their history stands as a permanent testimony to what occurs when a society decides some lives do not matter enough to save. They are the human price of institutionalized neglect, the genetic cost of social abandonment, and living proof that some tragedies are entirely avoidable if we only care enough to prevent them.